Hey there, bibliophiles. Welcome to another episode of From the Archives. We're doing a little bit different today, recording in advance. I've only had to do this once before, but we're getting to that time in the semester where my teaching load is a little bit different. I've got a lot of things to grade. I'll probably have to pre-record the following week's episode as well because I'm on a thesis committee and my student is defending on a Thursday, so I probably won't be able to do live stream these next 2 weeks, but should be able to in the future. So, try moving forward, it'd be ideal to live stream every Thursday at 11, but unfortunately, I got a lot of things going on, so I can't always guarantee that. But I will try to upload recordings every Thursday at 11, so scheduling the recordings at the very least, even if I can't necessarily do a live stream at 11. So that's just a little bit of the news. Other news and updates, since normally this is what I do in the live stream on Thursdays, is I'm definitely rocking the summer island vibes. As we gear up for field season, we're going to be outside in the sun a lot, digging and surveying for archaeological sites. I gave myself the COVID cut, or rather my wife did. I've got a nice short buzz, I think 1.5 on the clippers or something like that. Then I'm rocking my Hawaiian shirt today because it's supposed to get up into like the low 80s, high 70s today here in Ohio. So yeah, I'm feeling the summer vibes today as we record this. I'm also getting my second COVID shot the following day, which is why we're pre-recording this, because I don't know how I'm going to react to it. I've heard a lot of things about the Moderna shot, and the second one is more of a doozy than the first, and I'd rather just assume that I'm not going to be up to snuff to do a live stream after I get the shot. So that's why we're pre-recording it this week, and then obviously next week I've got the thesis defense to be part of. So with all that said, let's get rolling into the episode. Welcome to another episode of From the Archives, a book review podcast where I talk about a book from my library and whether you should or shouldn't read it. I'm Eric, a professor of anthropology at Cuyahoga Community College, and welcome to my library. The books in my library are sometimes old, sometimes rare, sometimes normal, but always interesting. This podcast is normally live streamed on YouTube at Anthropology Archives every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern. Every episode, I ask myself the following questions. Who wrote it? What's it about? What are other people saying about it? And should you read it or not? And whether I should can it or keep it, shelve it or shove it, chuck it or cherish it, reread or recycle, jettison or set it in, and any other kinds of fun alliterative puns about, should I keep the book on my bookshelf or should I pay it forward, let someone else read it, or is it so bad I should just recycle it or throw it in the dumpster, which has happened with a few books. With all that being said, let's pull today's book from the shelf. So this week we are talking about Difficult Loves by Italo Calvino. I might be mispronouncing his name, Italo Calvino. Could be pronounced various different ways. 290 pages. This one, the one that I read, is from 1985, the English translation, but was originally copyrighted in 1949 and then again in the 1950s. So basically, this is a series of short stories written by Italo Calvino over the course of the 40s and 50s. And from what I've gathered doing research on this book is that there's actually multiple versions of Difficult Loves from what I understand. There's the original 11 short stories, and then in the 50s he published another version with many additional short stories. So if you're reading reviews for it online, you might find a couple versions where they talk about just 11 short stories. The version I have includes like 30 some or like 27 or so short stories. So that's the one I'm going to be talking about, but it does include the original 11 as well. Sorry, I'm getting some major glare here. Oh, that's better. At least on my camera, so you can't actually see the title for those who are watching the video. So, what's it about? Well, it's a bunch of short stories, and in sort of reading through this book, it was a refreshing change of pace, obviously, because most of the books that I talk about on this podcast are usually about anthropology, archaeology, and the like. And so it was kind of refreshing to read some fiction, especially in bite-sized chunks, because oftentimes when I'm reading, I usually have my professor hat on. And so I find it hard to read something without like picking up a pen or pencil and writing in the margins or reading critically. And I tend not to read for fun. That's just the way I read. And not to say that I don't find it fun to read. That's a weird way of putting it. I think it's more accurate to say reading is something that I do actively and critically, unlike watching a TV show or a program or a YouTube video where you're not actually like turning on your brain very hard to watch something. You're just kind of watching something. I don't generally do that when reading. And so it was nice to kind of force myself into that element of, okay, I'm going to read this story. I'm not going to take notes. I'm just going to read it. I'm just going to enjoy it for what it is, a story, and we're going to leave it at that. I'm not trying to extract data out of it, gain any knowledge necessarily. So it was kind of a refreshing take. And also, something I learned about the library here is that we have a lot of short story compilations. So I think maybe what I'll do in the future is maybe talk about them as a sort of whole, or talking about short story books in general. But yeah, I've got like, the collected works of Ernest Hemingway that I could bring into the fold. Franz Kafka. I think I'm looking on the bookshelf here. We've got William Faulkner, Dorothy Parker, Leo Tolstoy, Haruki Murakami. I mean, we've got so many different compilations of short stories that I was kind of struck by how many we had, that it was like, okay, this might be something that I can come back to and circle back to and talk about more after having read this one. Obviously, Italo Calvino, an Italian author, so everything was translated from Italian to English by, who's the translator here? Oh, I forgot to give you your ASMR for this episode. So it's a paperback book, so probably doesn't sound very thick or heavy. This translation, I thought I had it here. Yeah, translated from the Italian by William Weaver and Archibald Colquhoun and Peggy Wright. So I'm not actually reading Calvino's words, but I mean, that is kind of just the way you're going to have to deal with it. I'm not going to learn Italian to read it in its original language. But what I found interesting about the book is it's a bunch of basically vignettes of these simple stories, mostly of World War II Italy, and post-war, and having a wife with a large Italian family, it definitely reminded me of how I've heard other family members and in-laws talk about experiences, like particularly the short story about breaking into a pastry shop and how the robbers get distracted by the pastries. They start eating them and whatnot. It's fun little stories like that I really enjoyed. What's nice about a short story book like this, probably in comparison to some of the other short story books that I have that we'll eventually talk in more detail about, is how short these ones were. The original 11 stories are like a couple of pages a piece. I mean, they're really short stories. Like you could probably read them in under 15 minutes, each of them. Well, not the whole thing, but like each story take you about 15 minutes. So it was really nice to be able to pick it up and just kind of tote it around like, hey, I'm just going to read one story. I really enjoyed the ability to bounce around in this book. So it was really nice to just sort of, pick up a story, read it, and then that's it. I don't have to, retain any knowledge about the characters or the story or the plot line or any of that stuff. It's just sort of a all in one sitting, have it with my morning cup of tea, or, you've got a little bit of time on your lunch break, just read one story. And then, so it was nice. I was actually able to get through this book very quickly because of that ability to just sort of pick it up, read a little bit, come back to it. It didn't feel like quite a slog in that regards, compared to the other books that I've had to read for this podcast. Now let's transition to talking about what other people are saying about it. If I can pull up the Goodreads review I have on it. So on Goodreads, this is one of the more popular books, surprise, surprise, because they mostly deal with fiction on Goodreads. I don't think this is the highest rated book that I've talked about on the podcast. I believe that might have been Jet Set or Don't Judge a Girl by Her Cover, the YA novels episode, where Kristen Kristen Trippy was a guest host. But this one has 7,349 ratings. 453 of them are written reviews. It has a 3.94 out of 5-star average rating. And it has, 42% of them are 4-star reviews, and only 42 of them are 1-star reviews. And I guess before I start reading them, I should probably give you my rating. I would say this is a solid short stories book. Is it my favorite one that I've read? Probably not. It has its moments. It's not for me. Like, it's very much, it's there. I think for some people who really like it, like, it clicks for them. But for me, there are enjoyable enough stories. I wasn't, over the moon for most of these stories. Some of them just sort of kind of feel like they're meandering, which I guess is that style of, like, soaking in the moment kind of thing. Experiencing the simple pleasures of, I guess in some cases, illegally breaking into a pastry shop, or sneaking onto someone's property and eating their food at a picnic. A lot of sort of questionable activities that are, like, they're not high crimes, but they're also not, like, it's probably not proper to go stealing stuff from other people, that kind of stuff. So I'm going to give it like a 3 out of 5. Pretty solid, middle of the road for me, at least as far as short stories go. But that's also coming from someone who, growing up, read a lot of Hemingway. I mean, that's why I have the collected works of Hemingway and Franz Kafka. And yeah, I guess it's just, it didn't wow me. It didn't warrant a 4 or a 5. It's definitely middle of the road for me. So I'd give it a solid 3 out of 5. But I just had it here. A lot of the 5-star reviews, you get a lot of mixed languages. I notice there's a lot of Greek, there's some Turkish, some Russian in here. But man, when someone has something to say for a 5-star review, they have something to say. And I've noticed, having looked at enough stuff on Goodreads with the books that we've talked about on the podcast, a lot of people, if they're gonna write a review, they're gonna write you, like, an English paper on why this book is good or bad. I generally see, and this might just be a reflection one way or the other, if it's polarizing, you're going to have a lot to say about it. Like, if it's a 5-star review, you're going to have paragraphs upon paragraphs. So it was actually kind of hard to find a review that was short, or shorter, I should say. I got to scroll back to find it. And then the opposite's true. If you have a 1-star review, you're probably not just going to say this book is bad. You're probably going to give me a gajillion reasons why this book is bad. Whereas if you gave it like a 2, 3, or 4, you might be like, good book, thumbs up emoji, that kind of thing. At least that's my general sense of having read enough stuff on Goodreads. That seems to be how it goes, is you get your 5-star reviews from, someone who's telling you why it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Then you get the 1-star reviews that are like, I'm going to give you a literary critique in the style of, like, the Frankfurt School, just really rip it to shreds over the course of like 7 or 8 paragraphs. Or you could be like me and have a whole podcast. So this pot calling the kettle black there, I suppose. But this is from Philip from July 8th, 2019. And it's a 5 out of 5 stars. And this is what Philip has to say. It's bittersweet to finish this book because it's been my loyal traveling companion for the last 3.5 years, living in backpacks and suitcases on the infrequent occasions I've needed them. The average length of the stories made it easy to pick up and put down, but it's Calvino's ability to create characters which uniquely explore fear, love, terror, lust, love, desire, etc. in a casual and relatable way. These stories were all pretty straightforward compared to everything else I've read by the author. Sorry, I realized for those who are watching the video, they probably want to read along, so I'm switching camera modes here for those who are watching. These stories were all pretty straightforward compared to everything else I've read by the author. I think the fact that this collection is full of gems without any fantastic elements make me rank Italo Calvino even higher in my literary pantheon. 4.65 out of 5, but I'll gladly round up. So that's from Philip, 5 out of 5 stars. And I think Philip kind of encapsulates my sentiments about the book as well. And sort of just, I guess, short story collections in general is they make for something, I think the way I read it is probably not the way I would recommend people reading it. I read it cover to cover. I mean, sure, I bounced around, but I read it in chunks with a very intended, like, I need to get it done by a certain date. Whereas I think the beauty of a short story book, especially this one, is in, sorry, there's that big whistle there with that S, is in the ability to, as Philip is saying in their review, you know, spending years just kind of off and on. It's just that book you kind of keep around. Maybe this would be a great book, in my opinion, to just keep in the car. Like if you have to wait awkwardly in a parking lot, you know, say someone's running in the store to grab something and you're just waiting, rather than, you know, get your phone out to scroll the internet, just, you know, pick up Italo Calvino, read one of the short stories, and then just put it back and until next time you're in that situation. Or, you know, you're waiting in line for something, or you know, you're waiting in general. Like, I think the short story collections fits that kind of role really well. At least this one. I don't know if I could necessarily recommend the same for, say, Ernest Hemingway or Franz Kafka. I'll have to reread those and kind of recontextualize those to see if I would give them the same kind of recommendation. But that's what at least one person is saying about it. And obviously you've gotten my feedback on it. If you have questions or comments or concerns or books that you recommend I read, maybe I have it in my library. If I don't, I might consider adding it to my library. Or you have suggestions for future episodes, feel free to reach out on our email at anthropologyarchives@gmail.com. Check out the spreadsheet, which has the book bin. So if there's any books that you missed or want to see what I rated them, the specific citation, like I provide all of the bibliographic information, like the author, publisher, all that kind of good stuff. And if it's up for grabs, if you want to take a book from the book bin is actually getting quite large. I've got a stack now of like 20 or so books that, you know, after the semester ends, I'll have to figure out what I'm going to be doing with them, but they're not going to be staying on my bookshelf, that's for sure. So if there's any book bins or books in the book bin that you're interested in, feel free to reach out via email. Keep up to date with the Telegram channel, which you can find on our YouTube banner page, or you can just look up Anthropology Archives on Telegram if you use Telegram. And that's going to do it for this week's episode. Next week, we will be talking about Community, Civics, and Rural Life by Arthur Dunn, and it is a book from 1920. So it's Community, Civics, and Rural Life. This one I just happened to pick up and started flipping through, and I think it's going to make for an interesting read. It's one of those older books that hopefully will be an interesting conversation starter. So that's going to do it for this week, and until next week, never stop reading.